On November 14, 2017, Zimbabwe military troops drove tanks into the capital city, Harare.
Military police in a tank. This is happening in Harare. Wow, it's real, guys. It is real.
They patrolled the streets, blocked access to government buildings, and took over the state television station to insist
that this is not a military takeover of government.
But it clearly was. Troops invaded the presidential palace and put the president, Robert Mugabe, in custody.
Comrade R.G. Mugabe and his family are safe and sound, and their security is guaranteed.
When you hear that a military coup has happened, it's common to assume that the result is a transfer of power. But in this case, it's very clear there is no revolution. It's merely an internal fight among the country's elites. Zimbabwe is one of the most corrupt countries in the world, and what we're seeing is a fight to keep it that way.
As soon as we have accomplished our mission, we expect that the situation will return to normalcy.
Once praised as a war hero, Robert Mugabe helped Zimbabwe win independence from Great Britain in 1980. He became president under Zimbabwe's new constitution with the wide support of the people. But soon he digressed into a repressive dictator. He secured his power through aggression and threats, and there have been reports of state-sponsored torture and killings. Now that Mugabe is 93 years old and reportedly in poor health, the fight for political influence is more intense than ever. And it's caused a split in Mugabe's own party, the ZANU-PF. On one side we have the old guard, led by Mugabe's sacked vice president Emerson Mnangagwa. Like Mugabe, he fought for Zimbabwe's independence and has a checkered past that includes human rights abuses against political opponents and ethnic minorities. As an old friend of Mugabe's and vice president since 2014, Mnangagwa was the heir apparent for many years. But all that changed on November 6th, when Mugabe's government said Mnangagwa had exhibited traits of disloyalty and fired him. This seems to indicate Mugabe's support for another successor, Grace Mugabe, his own wife. She has recently risen within the party, but is extremely unpopular nationwide, mostly due to her expensive shopping habits, which earned her the nickname Gucci Grace. The military has sided with Mnangagwa.
That when it comes to matters of protecting our revolution, the military will not hesitate to step in.
On November 15th, they did just that, taking control of the capital in what they deemed a guardian coup, protecting the Zimbabwe people and democracy. But their interests are more self-motivated. They want to secure their own power. They have control over lucrative farming and mining operations and access to foreign currency. To keep this power, they need a united ZANU-PF, who face elections scheduled in 2018. So what's missing in all of this? The people of Zimbabwe. Whoever ends up in charge, Mnangagwa, the military, or Grace Mugabe, corruption will continue. All these actors want to keep the status quo. But for the general population, the status quo is a society of unequal opportunity. During Mugabe's 37 years of leadership, massive corruption was commonplace. There have been repeated allegations of Mugabe and his cabinet embezzling money from mining and diamond industries. Mugabe even won the state-owned lottery in 2000. Transparency International estimates that Zimbabwe loses $1 billion a year to corruption. All the while, Zimbabwe's economy has suffered. The poverty rate is at 72%, inflation have reached peaks of 231 million%, and GDP growth has been stagnant. This has made Zimbabwe one of the most economically unequal countries in the world, a problem it shares with much of the region. Studies show that low levels of economic growth and high levels of poverty are common conditions in African countries that experience military coups. In fact, 36% of all coup attempts since 1950 have occurred in Africa. The problem is that coups rarely address these problems. Military coups in Niger, Burkina Faso, and Burundi were attempts by leaders to extend their term limits, while coups in Guinea and Togo were sparked by competition over secession. The same appears to be happening in Zimbabwe. What's uncertain in the near future is Zimbabwe's political leadership. What's certain is that politicians fight over their own self-interests and those of the people are forgotten.
So high are tensions in Zimbabwe these days that it didn't take long for a sighting of a few tanks on the road to Harare to set off rumors of a coup underway. For many who live in a country staggering under the weight of poverty born of government corruption and mismanagement, the rumors are welcome.
What is needed right now in Zimbabwe is to remove this Mugabe family in power. If there is this implosion, the implosion is good for the citizenry of Zimbabwe.
The current tensions are part of an ongoing power struggle within the ruling ZANU-PF party, Robert Mugabe at its head and that of the country for nearly 4 decades. The 93-year-old says he'll run in elections again next year, but has been championing his wife Grace as his eventual successor. A former secretary, 40 years Mugabe's junior, she's been living lavishly and building or buying a power base of her own.
I love my president. I respect my president. I will help him to make this country prosper.
Last week, Mugabe fired his wife's main rival, the Vice President Emerson Mnangagwa, a former intelligence chief who enjoys the support of the army. He has since fled the country, but yesterday the head of Zimbabwe's defense forces issued a warning aimed at those who would harm his supporters. In other words, Robert Mugabe.
We must remind those behind the current treacherous shenanigans that when it comes to matters of protecting our revolution, the military will not hesitate to step in. Amen.
Mugabe's supporters and the ZANU-PF party machinery have in turn accused him of treason, issuing a statement saying the army chief did not represent the rest of the command element. And so the table has been laid.
Now, we have Margaret Evans joining us right now from London. And Margaret, I want to ask you, based on what we've seen unfold over the last couple of hours, how do you think this is likely to play out?
There's still a lot of uncertainty about that. People are going to be very fearful, obviously. I think one of the most significant developments seems to be, from the agency reports we're hearing, is the takeover of the state broadcaster, because that is, you know, almost coup 101, if you like. Take control of the media and the message going out to the people. We are also hearing some reports of explosions, so people will be fearing violence, but it's still really a little too soon to tell. And you know, talking to people earlier, they described it a little bit as potentially, you know, two sides sizing each other up, basically testing the waters to see whether they have the backing to bring this together. But you basically see right now a very strong challenge to Mugabe by the military. This is a really big open split for Zimbabwe, one that we haven't seen to this degree before now, really.
Right. And Margaret, you spent time in Zimbabwe earlier this year. I mean, if things continue to escalate the way they have been, where do you think the people will stand in all of this? I mean, give us the context there.
Well, you know, as I said earlier, I think people are going to be worried about violence, and I think that will be the highest thing in their minds. If this really does seem like it might be a fight between the military and potentially the police who might be supporting Robert Mugabe. So that's going to be their biggest thing. On the other hand, people in that country are desperate for change. Many people support Mugabe because they see him as a liberation hero, but their dreams have been disappointed. It is a very poor country. They have huge problems with health care, and they will be worried that this coup is going to make their lives even more difficult because there'll be political uncertainty. Tourist dollars are going to drop. People are not going to be wanting to go to Victoria Falls, and those kinds of issues, the survival of their families in terms of the economy, will be really high.
All right. Margaret Evans watching the situation for us tonight from London. Thanks so much.
The man believed to be behind the coup in Zimbabwe is the country's recently sacked vice president, Emerson Mnangagwa, also known as the Crocodile. Mnangagwa, 75, is a notorious and much feared figure in Zimbabwe, having led a vicious crackdown on opponents in the 1980s with the help of the dreaded North Korean-trained 5th Army Brigade. Thousands of civilians were killed during the Gukurahundi campaign, but Mnangagwa has always denied involvement. His reputation for cruelty is so legendary that he was one of the few leaders of Zimbabwe known to drive around the country without security. He is also known for his unpredictable darting eyes. He has had a long and varied political career, leading at one point the Justice, Defense, Housing and Finance Ministries, as well as being the Speaker of the Lower House and a spymaster. Mnangagwa was widely viewed as Mugabe's successor until he was ditched by the president last week and fled to South Africa. Mugabe had accused his former deputy of plotting to take power from him, while his ambitious wife Grace referred to him as a snake that must be hit on the head after the two clashed. But Mnangagwa, who recently survived a poisoning attempt blamed on ice cream from Mugabe's own dairy, has been telling allies he would return rapidly and everything would soon be sorted. He is a leader of the so-called Lacoste faction, named after the clothes firm's crocodile logo, which matches Mnangagwa's reptilian nickname, within Mugabe's party. The group enjoys strong support among military figures. It is locked in a struggle with Grace's G40 group. With the events of today, the struggle between Grace and Mnangagwa to succeed 93-year-old Mugabe appears to be shifting in the crocodile's favor. Born in the southwestern Zvishavana district on September 15, 1942, he completed his early education in Zimbabwe before his family relocated to neighboring Zambia. His grandfather was a traditional leader and his father a political agitator for the repeal of colonial laws that disadvantaged blacks. In 1966, Mnangagwa joined the struggle for independence from Britain, becoming one of the young combatants who helped direct the war after undergoing training in China and Egypt. University of London educated Mnangagwa has been close to Mugabe since the two were side by side in the struggle against racist white minority rule in then Rhodesia. Not long after ZANU-PF, modern Zimbabwe's ruling party, was formed in 1963, Mnangagwa was sent for military training in Communist China. He earned his crocodile nickname when he returned to Zimbabwe and led a gang of fighters called the Crocodile Group during the Civil War. The gang blew up several trains during their operations against the Rhodesian government and, as a consequence, Mnangagwa was arrested in 1965. He confessed to revolutionary activity and was savagely tortured, but escaped the death penalty after successfully arguing that, because he was under 21, he should not be executed. Instead, he was sentenced to 10 years in jail, being kept at Salisbury Prison, Grey Prison, Kami Prison and Harare Prison. While in prison in Salisbury, later renamed Harare, he became close to Mugabe and other nationalist leaders. After being deported to Zambia, Mnangagwa studied law and, in the late 1970s, became a senior member of ZANU-PF. When Zimbabwe became independent in 1980, Mnangagwa was named as Prime Minister Mugabe's national security chief. 7 years later, when Mugabe made himself president, Mnangagwa was made justice minister. His loyalty to Mugabe was rewarded in 2000 when, having lost his seat in parliament, he was appointed to an unelected seat and made Speaker of the Lower House. Mnangagwa repaid Mugabe for his support during the 2008 elections, with the crocodile said to have steered the president to victory after Morgan Tsvangirai won the first round. Hundreds of Tsvangirai's supporters were killed in the political violence blamed on Mugabe's regime, forcing Tsvangirai to step aside and giving Mugabe a clear run at the presidency. Mnangagwa was then made defense minister and, in 2013, vice president. He once remarked that he had been taught to destroy and kill, although he later claimed to be a born-again Christian. Takava Firazu, a political analyst at Masvingo State University, previously described Mnangagwa as a hardliner to the core. Mnangagwa reputedly has deep pockets should he decide to launch a political comeback. A U.S. diplomatic cable published by WikiLeaks in 2008 claimed Mnangagwa had amassed extraordinary wealth during Zimbabwe's 1998 intervention in gold and diamond-rich Democratic Republic of Congo. He appeared to be on course to become the country's next leader, but First Lady Grace Mugabe did not approve. Last month she warned of a possible coup being orchestrated by Vice President Mnangagwa amid a heated power struggle. She claimed his allies were threatening to kill people who did not support his bid to succeed Mugabe. Grace recently told supporters in 1980 this person called Mnangagwa wanted to stage a coup. He wanted to wrestle power from the president. He was conspiring with whites. That man is a ravisher.